she's so rude. She keeps interrupting me. He's been a director of children's services in Stirling and head of education in East Lothian, and amongst other things has been an advisor responsible for curriculum development and assessment. He's worked in schools, he's worn lots of important hats in education in Scotland. It's an impressive CV, but what catches my eye and what I've always seen in him is his passion for the best possible world for our children. On his blurb on his website, he says, I want to make a difference and I believe that I can. The difference I want to make is ensuring that all young people have an education that brings richness to their lives. I want them to be able to think for themselves and to be committed to building a better world than the one they are inheriting. I think I can do this by helping those working with them to recognise their strengths and to find the energy to build on them. Brilliant. Thank you. There we go. Over to you, David.
Well, excellent, Susie, and thanks for making me sound like a real tosser. That's really great. Excellent. And I'm ending up your day, everybody. And what I'm going to do, so you don't have to look at me, although hopefully you all appreciate the beautiful background that I've brought to you. I'm bringing you a little piece of Scotland right here behind me. Can you see that? Sky and lochs and all of that. Just a wee touch of home. And another wee touch of home will be coming up shortly as I share my screen. And can you see that? And hit you with my title slide. And that's it, guys. It's Picking Up the Pieces. And it's the perfect title because that's what today's about. Today's about picking up the piece for other people. And a wonderful quote from you, which absolutely exemplifies that title. So it's about picking up the pieces, and it's about picking up the pieces of the day as well. Because this is where we are. We know about ACEs. We've got the science, we've got the knowledge, we've got the experiences, we've got the lessons, and you've talked about these all day. And the question really is, what is it that we're going to do about it? And I think what we need to do is we need to make sure that we get action at 3 levels. And there's the 3 levels that I think matter and are important. The political, the professional, but profoundly important also is the personal. And one of the things I've loved about your event is the fact that it's all about love. That it's gone right into that rich emotional and personal level from the very start. And that's great, because I think it's also important that you already recognise that you've got lots of good stuff going on and that you do exactly that. Oh, I'm crying. And we don't really have time to hear the rest of the track, so we'll just crack on. Because here are some of the quotes that exemplify why you should hang on to what you've got. I loved it when one of the voices in the film talked about my family didn't hand down heirlooms. What they did was they handed down problems and difficulties. And the other quote, which was stunning for me, when one of the people in the film said, I had no roadmap, no guide, no inner guide. And that just struck me so powerfully in terms of that lack of capacity that people can have for self-regulation, that inability to make connections, to forge their way through their lives. And that my mind was shattered and I couldn't pick up the pieces, which was a kind of heart-rending moment for me and what I thought was a brilliant and heart-rending film that you made. But then you got this. I had a safe space. I had a key worker. I got counselling. It was that whole positivity that came through and the approaches that were picked up, being told that you're allowed to feel. I love that line from the film. And that's really at the heart, again, of what you're talking about today, that importance of allowing people to feel, to be in touch with themselves, to be in touch with their own feelings, to recognise that hurt people hurt people. And that what we need to do is we need to help people to recognize the damaging feelings that they've got and then help to deal with them. But that, I met you guys and it was a whole different story. If ever there was something that we would want as our epitaph, it would be that, would it not? I met you guys and it was a whole different story. You were my shining stars. And then a brilliant summation in the film about what mattered and what was important: love, care, support, and understanding. So lots of you who are part of this conference, for sure, are doing things right. And that's really, I think, to your credit. Now, why? There we go. So as well as hanging on to what we've got, let's just see what we've got here. Let's just look at some of the lessons that we might take advantage of as we try and build on your practice. And I think there's a lot from Scotland that offers lessons about change. That's the challenge that we've got here in Scotland. I think it's the challenge that you've got in Hull. That when we're dealing with people with ACEs, it's never poverty. And unsupported trauma, unmet need, never have only one consequence. So all of the time, whoever you are, whatever your role, however you work with people, you are always dealing with complexity. And for sure, it's never just the child. And the government is banging on just now. They do a lot of that banging on stuff, but they're banging on a lot about schools, and the vocabulary is depressing. It's all about catch up and never recovery. It's all about attainment. It's all about children being part of a race, some kind of weird competition. It's never about self-discovery. It's never about the building of resources. It's never about the creation of resilience. We're caught up in a dialogue which suggests that schools can make a difference, but they can never make all the difference, because it's always going to be more than just attainment. And it's also about more than health and more than just care. Because this is the reality for the young people that you've been talking about today, and the adults you've been talking about today, that it's never one child with one problem. You know, when I started teaching, and it's a long time ago, as you can possibly gather from looking at me, but when I started teaching, I taught in Scotland, and I had kids in my classes who were just poor. Right? And teaching in Scotland, they all looked like Ed Sheeran. They were all gingers. They were all slightly pale. You know, they all looked a bit like that. But there were kids who only had one problem. Latterly, that's the kind of complexity we see. And that tends to be how we deal with them. Whether it's adults, whether it's children, they're in the middle of that maze with all of that help and support notionally available. But look where everyone is. And that's how we've tended to deal with it. And we recognised that in Scotland as a massive problem. That what we were doing was we were putting kids into that maze, we were dealing with them down the lines that we saw as ours. And what we tried to do was we tried to do that. We tried to take the children out. We tried to get them out the maze. And what we tried to do was we tried to put somebody alongside them as a lead professional. And the job of that lead professional was to be the shining stars that you heard about in the film. It was to pull together the resources and support around the children and the family. And we talked about it as getting it right for every child. And that as a commitment, I think, was huge. And what's important as well is that it doesn't matter who that lead professional is. As long as the young person or the adult has trust in that person, as long as there's belief, as long as there's a relationship, that's the right person to make the links and to make that connection. Because that's what we're concerned about. We're concerned when we deal with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, we're concerned with putting that jigsaw back together and putting a smile on the face of that child or that adult. And it's that simple in some ways. But what we recognised in Scotland was that we needed to pull all of that together in some way. And that's the model that we used and we talked about. And there's real validity, I think, in this. Now, I've sent this presentation to Susie It's available. You're welcome to have it. You can contact Susie, you can have it sent out to you. I think this diagram is really helpful because what it does is it shows how all the sides of the triangle have to be active before we're going to make the kind of changes that we have the ambition to make. We need people to be healthy, to be learning, to be achieving, but we also need them to be able to communicate. We want people to have confidence in who they are, and that's a theme that I'll return to later. And all of that, all of the things on that side of the triangle that we have ambitions for, require everyday care and help. They require safety. They require somebody to be there for them, the power of one that's often talked about. But how much more effective if we can make the power of one the power of many. So I think there's some real validity in how we pull things together. And we recognise that in Scotland, that what we really needed to do was to create a culture. And I've loved, again, what you've done today. You've really focused on the creation of a culture. You've had all sorts of different workshops and experiences, some that have been direct, some that have been more to do with self-development and self-awareness. But the whole idea has been to try and build a culture. And it's been a joy to listen to the chat. It's been a joy to listen to people talking and sharing. Because what we're trying to do is to build in that culture of belief, the belief that we can make a difference, and a clarity about where we want to make that difference. And again, there's been a focus around that today. But I think the other thing that's been really strong is the emphasis on taking responsibility for making that difference. If we want to get the kind of changes that we hope for, we all need to take a responsibility for that. Because all the changes that we want to make interact. You know, procedural changes, cultural changes interact, small changes, large changes. I was very touched a couple of years ago, a woman that I had taught, and I taught her every year. I was a secondary school teacher. I taught her for all 6 years that she was in the school. And sadly, she died in her 50s. And I got a phone call to say that when our executor had gone through her papers, she'd left instructions for her funeral. And one of them was, David Cameron is to do my obituary. And I think she meant me. I hope to God she didn't mean the other Dave Cameron, because he would have made a right rubbish job of it. But I said, why? And the comment that I got back was that in many respects, she did a challenging time at school. She was a heavy girl. She had a speech impediment. She was a bright girl, but she didn't necessarily sound it. She had a hard time. And what the person said was, never in your room. Because when she came into your room, you made her the best she could be, and everybody saw that. I don't think I'd planned that. I don't think I'd had a sense of that. But I was overjoyed that it had happened. And that's what I mean about that interaction of small change and large changes. Some of the transformational changes that we look for stem from that kind of small action that we take, that's both personal and professional. And as we do that, here's what we need to do. We need to listen, we need to learn, and we need to act. And I think you've done a lot of listening and a lot of learning today. And the feeling that I'm getting is that everybody's ready to act. And when you do act, I think one of the things that we've got to try and do is make sure that we take the actions that matter. When I meet colleagues, whether they're working in schools, whether they're in social work, whether they're in a third sector organisation, one of the most common characteristics they have is that they're knackered. That's a technical expression. I don't know how familiar you are with it in Hull, but folk are just knackered. And coming through the pandemic has exacerbated all of that. Lots of folk are absolutely on their knees because the demands on them have increased and the pressures of them pressures on them rather, have increased in exactly the same proportion. So we need to make sure that when we look at what we do, we take account of what are the things that have a real impact and what are the things that just take a lot of time and effort. What we need to do is use this kind of graph to identify which are the things that matter and which are the breakable plates. Because my guess would be that whatever you're doing, whatever your role is, whatever part you play in dealing with adverse childhood experiences, or whether you're someone who's simply been a victim of adverse childhood experiences, you're spinning so many plates, some of them are going to drop anyway. So let's make sure that we make sound judgments and use tools like this to identify what the things are that can make that kind of difference for us. Some lessons from Scotland there, I think, about prioritisation, about the kind of scope that we need to work with, about the need for us to work together. This comes from a local authority in England, and I've taken out the references, the direct references to the particular authority. But when I worked with them, they had had 2 inspections, a safeguarding inspection and a social work inspection. And they had both been best described as dreadful. And the heart had been knocked out of people. But they had gathered themselves back together, and this comes from an interim report that was done on that authority. And where I think it's really helpful is the way in which it highlights what were the things that made a difference, about senior managers and leaders having a good understanding of the scale and depth of where their services weren't actually matching up to the needs of young people, and that willingness to develop comprehensive plans to be appropriate. All of these things, I think, are important and vital as we move forward. And again, it's something you need to look for from senior leaders in Hull. Often my experience is that we don't have many senior leaders at events like this on a Saturday. And we certainly do need to engage them. We need to get that movement forward. They were also praised for that, for recognising the need to identify a really significant base for budget growth. Huge problem. We get the services we're prepared to pay for. And again, I think Hull's particularly interesting. You have a wonderful MP. Emma Hardy, I think, is an absolutely outstanding Member of Parliament. And I've rarely been more impressed by her than when she turned down a shadow ministerial position because she felt that the needs of her constituency were demanding enough without that additional responsibility. And there's not many MPs that will put personal ambition behind that commitment to community. So there's a real basis there. You've got that level of interest, political support and understanding at quite a high level within Hull. I know less about the local authority basis there, but you've got springboards in terms of your City of Culture background and all of that. Hugely important that we get that identification of budget and resource. And that, one of the key things that was identified, close and productive relationships. And that's where a day like this is massively helpful. Because even virtually, what you're doing is you're seeing people. You're getting the chance to identify who's with you. You're getting the chance to see those people who are prepared to share and where you would benefit from that sharing. And getting that particular closeness of relationship between key agencies. We haven't always been very good at that in Scotland. We haven't always been very good at getting out of our own cultures. But where we have had successes, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Violence Reduction Unit established in Glasgow, which took a public health approach to violent crime. Stabbings in Glasgow were epidemic. They are now rare. And they are rare not because of a Priti Patel style of punishment, not because of the threat, not because of deterrence, but because of understanding, because of a willingness to look at the real causes. Did a brilliant program recently with a woman who told me something I should have known, which is, if you want to see where potential terrorists are coming from, don't worry about radicalization. Worry about domestic violence. Worry about the experiences that these men, and it's generally men, have had in their homes and growing up. Look for the ACEs. Because when the ACEs are there, when that readiness towards violence is there, it can be claimed by the far right, by the far left, by a particular religion, cult, or whatever. But a real key message there that we need to get these kind of relationships established. We need to get that working together. And again, lots of comments there about things that were done. But some of the things that I think I love around that, senior managers continue to stabilize the workforce and secure more manageable workloads. One of the things that I did in Stirling that I was very proud of is that I made sure that every single social worker that we had at least one case on their caseload which would not be judged a success simply by the avoidance of further harm. And too many of us who are working in this area are only ever allowed to work with cases which are extreme and where the measure of success is exactly that, the avoidance of further harm, where we're not getting the chance to turn things around. So real issues, I think, to think about around this kind of feedback that this particular authority was getting. And that, I love that. Seen an organisation which presents a clearer, calmer and more informed narrative. That's what you've been building today. You've been building that clearer and more informed narrative as you've considered the background and circumstances. You've looked at the science, you've looked at the research, you've looked at the individual experience, you've seen all of that there. And what you're doing with that, I hope, is now translating that into your action plan moving forward. But you need to get that endorsement from senior management. And again, what you've done today, hopefully, is a clarion call that will bring that kind of support to you. And obviously, there's more and more comments there, which if you're interested, you can read when you get the presentation, but I need to be mindful of time. But as we do that, let's recognize that what we need is that strong corporate commitment to the improvement agenda and an unequivocal message about the priority of addressing need at the earliest possible stage and making sure that the resources are there. So we need that leadership change. We need that culture change that we've talked about, but we also need practice change. And coming back to the theme of your conference, the message, I think, was a bit of this. You need that. Your biggest message, you need a whole lot of love. And it's an absolutely brilliant quote, I think, from a young man who talked about being at the end of his tether. And he said, all I needed was just a wee bit of structure and a whole lot of love. And you might have seen this video before. You'll certainly be seeing the man that's in it tomorrow night if you're tuned into his particular channel. But if we want to see the difference that love can make, just have a look at this.
Ian's still the highest scoring striker ever to play for Arsenal, and he owes a lot to the man who first taught him to kick a ball, his old school teacher, Sid Pigden.
As I haven't seen him for, what, 23, 24 years, so he would now be expecting me to be 6 feet under, I would think. I don't actually think, he probably won't recognise because he won't believe it's me. Hello, Ian. Long time no see. Mr. Pigden. You're alive. I'm alive, he says. How are you doing? I can't believe it. Someone said you was dead. As you see, I'm very much And I'm so glad you've done so well with yourself.
He was so supportive all the time. He kind of like had me as his kind of like special guy. I don't know what to say. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. You know, now I realise how important he was in my life. The first main imposing figure, male figure in my life, who was trying to guide me on the right road.
How far are we going back now? 40 years, 30 years anyway.
Easy, 32 years.
Yeah.
And that sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? That sums it up perfectly. Ian Wright was a young man who couldn't self-regulate. He talks about having rages. They used to call them the heebie-jeebies. I suspect now we would have called it ADHD. He'd probably be medicated. And I suspect that had he been medicated, he would never have been the highest scoring striker to play for Arsenal. And that's not knocking the approach that we take to ADHD. But that's who he became. He became that person who can hold his own on television, on an international stage. He is somebody who is completely at home with his own emotions because somebody did that for him. Somebody made him secure, both in place and self and among other people. Somebody gave him confidence, not by focusing all the time on who he was, but focusing a lot of the time on who he might become. And whoever we are and however we engage with people, that's key, isn't it? That ability to let people see not who they are, but who they might become. That's the hope that all of these people in the film that you watched today, that's the support that they needed, isn't it? That ability to see themselves as they might become, to help develop that resilience when things don't work, when they go wrong, that ability to come back. And I think for lots of us, it's a recognition that there's no quick cure for the adverse childhood experience. And often we need to keep engaging despite the difficulties and challenges that are put in our path. Giving people that sense of capability, allowing them to build that sense of control, both of themselves and of situations, and that concept of consequence, so that people begin to understand how things work. And we do that by offering recognition and identity, by giving people that sense of who they are, knowing that they are known to someone. So many people that we deal with have no sense of themselves at all. They are purely defined. One of the voices in the film talking about being told so often by her mother that she was the spawn of Satan, that she came to believe it herself. That requires that recognition and identity to give people that sense of who they are and who they might become, as I've said. Giving them that place of stability, even if it's briefly, but in your time, in your space, a sense of stability. And lots of the work that you've done around meditation, well-being and so on, hugely important in allowing you to center yourself to offer stability to others. And simply caring. Simply that sense of being willing to care, that what happens to someone else makes a difference to you, and giving them that sense of success, that wider experience of life. So many of the people that you've talked about today will never have been out with their own immediate neighbourhood or environment. And again, we have that opportunity, some of us in the roles that we have, to give them that wider experience of life. I took a bunch of kids from an area called Westerhales in Edinburgh to the National Gallery of Scotland. And as we got off the bus, I said to one of the wee girls, "Have you ever been to the gallery before?" She said, "Mr. Cameron, I've never been in Edinburgh." And I said, "You live in Edinburgh?" And she said, "Not this Edinburgh." And that narrowness, that narrowness of focus that lots of people have in their lives is something that we need to open up and challenge by offering that richness that Susie referred to in the introduction. There's what I think you're aiming for. When you're working with people with adverse childhood experience, when you're assisting them, You're trying to ensure that safety. You're trying to add value to their lives. More importantly, I think you're trying to get them to add value to your lives. And what you're doing all the time is confounding destiny. This is not about social mobility. This is not about trying to rescue some kids and send them off into another world and leave their community behind. This is about changing the path, changing the narrative that's been written for these people, because we have the ability and capacity at our best to do that. And hopefully what we do is we educate, we develop, and we support people who can come back and strengthen the social cohesion within their own communities. So many of these people in the film today, so many colleagues that I work with and know are people who've gone back to add their voice to change so that other people do not follow their path. And that empowers communities and engages communities. And I think that's hopefully what you're about, because there for me is the underpinning philosophy that you've got, that there must always be that focus on the experience of the child and family. And that idea of respecting lived experience is so, so important. You saw that last night in the Resilience film. You saw it again today in your own film, about picking up and recognizing quality, describing what's done, what you do that works, categorizing it so that we can build on it. Because quality needs to be built in. It won't be assured in by inspection or regulation or whatever. It comes when we build it in and create it. And we need to recognize that it's by looking at our own practice, reflecting on our own experience and what we've done, that we give ourselves the ability to move forward. You do not build on weakness, you build on strengths. And it's vital that at the end of a day like this, that you reflect on the strengths that you've found in yourselves and that you've seen in others. And making sure that we translate that and look at outcomes and look at how we change things qualitatively as well as quantitatively. Too much of a focus for me in quality assurance is about numbers. It's about what can be easily measured. We need to look at emotion and feeling. And again, I think you should be proud that you've done that. But it needs to be more than intuition. And it needs to be shared. And again, I'm very proud to be part of your day, because I think you share that view, that we can't transform the lives of children unless we transform the lives of families. That what we need is an approach which is holistic, that we don't need the holy cow of social mobility, which I think is the Trojan horse of equality. Let's rescue, let's help the individual escape, let's recruit them, let's get them on our side, and let's leave the rest of the world behind. And what we need to do is we need always to be open to that learning. Because if learning is the answer in terms of moving on, it needs to be the answer for everyone. We need to be learning. And we also need to recognize that, particularly in an area like Hull, we need people to rise with their community and not beyond it. We need a move away from individualism and towards collectiveness. We need to tell success stories, but the success stories should be ones which benefit others. Because that's the truth. That's absolutely the truth. That's where real change comes from. And the David Cameron that said that, sitting in front of you today, it's not the tosser that ruined the country and got us out of the EU. It's a different David Cameron. So some questions for you around the day of. You're fired up, I hope, not by me necessarily, but I hope you've been fired up by your day. I hope you've been fired up by seeing what you're capable of and what colleagues and people close to you are capable of. But what permissions do you need to go out and make that difference? What is it that you need to enable you? And what barriers are there that require to be removed? Because I profoundly believe that you want to make the changes that have been at the heart of the discussions that you've had today. I thank you hugely for that. In case you're wondering what on earth's been going on, I've been the real David Cameron. I appear without any prior notification in cartoon form for you. If there's anything you want to engage with me about, that's my email address. I have a website. I mean, it's garbage, but it's there. And there's lots of weird stuff on it. I'm on Twitter, raving constantly on all sorts of subjects. And if it's really urgent, there's a mobile number for you. I would love it if people who were involved in today wanted to continue this kind of discussion and this kind of conversation. I hope that you're proud to have been part of this day. I hope you're proud to be part of the title and the commitment and everything else that's been associated with the day. I've certainly been proud and very, very privileged to be allowed to be part of it. Thanks very much. And what's left of your weekend, enjoy it. And it's coming home. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I feel like we need to clap. Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Brilliant end to a fantastic couple of days.